So before we start this book, I just wanted to say that I want to send a thank you out to the crew at Dollar Tree for helping me pick out neat items to put in the goodie bags for trick-or-treaters and for our neighbors. And I also want to thank Arby's as always. You guys are amazing. And next, My Tricks and Treats is the book that I'm going to share with you. I found this at betterworldbooks.com at a reasonable price. And I'm really sure that everyone's going to enjoy it here, and it's going to be a great gift in the treat bag. As I said, I always try to do something educational for the kids and fun. And this has got Halloween stories, songs, poems, recipe, crafts, and fun for the kids. Introduction. Halloween is in the air again. It's in the wind that pounces and gusts. It's in the pumpkins and the fallen leaves. It's in the darkness where danger lurks. And it's in your thoughts as you plan what you will be for Halloween. Have you ever wondered why Halloween is so spooky? Or who started carving faces on pumpkins? Or where witches and black cats came from? My Tricks and Treats will let you in on all the secrets of Halloween and much more. These pages will inspire you to make recipes and crafts as sweet ghosties and mystery masks. After reading the scary, sometimes funny Halloween tales, you might even want to have a storytelling party. My Tricks and Treats gives your party ideas suggestion for costume, food, lots of silly poems and songs, and juicy facts about Halloween. With My Tricks and Treats and your imagination, you will have the best Halloween ever. Okay. Chapter 1. Fright Night. Why is Halloween such a frightening night, different from any other? No one really knows, but we do know it almost always been a creepy night. It may have started more than 2,000 years ago when the Celts, a farming tribe that lived in parts of Europe and England, every year the Celts held a festival called Samhain. And Halloween gets its date and spookiness from the ancient celebration. Samhain was the Celts' New Year, though they celebrated it on November 1st instead of January 1st, as we do. Just as our New Year's Eve, the celebrating started on the night before, or the last night of their year, which is October 31st. Samhain represented the Celts' New Year because it was the last night of summer, and the end of the growing and grazing season, and also beginning of winter and a new farming year. Samhain was the special night between the hot season and the cold. The Celts worshipped many gods and believed in all sorts of spirits. The rest of the year the spirits stayed in other world or the land of the dead, but on the eve of Samhain, October 31st, the barriers between the other world and the human world were leak. Large troops of magical beings from burial mounds, hills, lakes, streams, rivers, and springs. Celtic myths tell of fierce monsters going on destructive rampages, using poison or fire to destroy whatever was in their path. Their wild destruction of crops, animals, and people could continue all year unless the Celts properly soothed the gods and the spirits. It was a frightening night for the Celts. They used huge fires and magic to protect themselves from these evil spirits and gave them all kinds of gifts. The religious leaders, called Druids, lit bonfires on hilltops and gathered deep in forest branches of sacred mistletoe. They threw offerings into bonfires and repeated special charms and spells. All these rituals ensured that their crops would grow, animals would multiply, and that they would be safe from evil spirits throughout the coming year. The Celts celebrated the Feast of Samhain for hundreds of years until they conquered by Roman in the year of AD 43. The Romans had a festival to honor the dead called Ferlaia, and it was also celebrated on October 31st. The Romans' festival of Ferralia and the Celtic feast of Samhain blended together to make October 31st. That's a double night of the dead. For many years, people in parts of Europe and England continued to believe that the spirits of the dead returned to the earth on the night of October 31st. Every night they built bonfires, offered gifts to visiting spirits. A new religion of Christianity was becoming more popular. However, by the year AD 325, it was official religion of the Roman Empire. Church leaders wanted all religious celebrations to be Christian, but they could not stop the people from celebrating the return of the dead on October 31st. So the church leaders gave the tradition a new meaning and a new name. These celebrations were now to be honored the spirits of Christian saints or holy people. The new Christian name was All Saints' Day or Hallows' Day. Saint and hallow mean the same thing. And the night before was called All Hallows Even or Halloween. The night of October 31st was now a time to thank and pray for the spirits of the holy saints who would be visiting the earth on November 1st. However, some of the Celts believes emerge again every Halloween when the spirits fly on Fright Night. Okay, now we're going to read a little bit here of these side strips, and then I'm going to show you some pictures. And I probably will do a recipe. I'm going to try and get you to chapter 2 tonight. That's my goal. Darkness descends on October 31st by the light of the moon. Imagination takes flight on a witch's broom. Ghosts and goblins dance on their midnight spree. Frightening fun begins on Halloween. Seeing things. Sometimes they're in the corner. Sometimes they're by the door. Sometimes they're all a-standing in the middle of the floor. Sometimes they're a-sitting down. Sometimes they're walking around. So softly and so creepy-like they never make a sound. Sometimes they are black as ink, and other times they're white, but the color ain't no difference when you see things at night. Eugene Field. Okay, now we're going to read the 2 parts here, and then I'm going to show you the 2 pages so you can really get involved in this book. The Man in the Moon. The man in the moon, as he sailed in the sky, was a very remarkable skipper, but he made a mistake when he tried to take a drink from the milk from the dipper. He dipped right into the Milky Way and slowly, carefully filled it. The big bear growled and the little bear howled, and the frightening him so he spilled it. Mr. Bones. He dances in the moonlight, moments after midnight, the spindly skeletal delight known as Mr. Bones. He dances on the gravestones, rattling his long bones, ignoring ghosts with his grim groans. Merry Mr. Bones. He was a syncopated beat, marking time with his bony feet. Halloween's the first time to meet the famous Mr. Bones. Why do we dress up on Halloween? Some say the Celts started it. The Celts wore costumes made from animal heads and furs to the Samhain bonfires. These disguises confused evil spirits, so they did not recognize a human beneath the mask, but thought it was another spirit. Evil spirits do not attack other spirits, so the disguised person was safe from harm. We probably get our costume of wearing masks on Halloween from the Celts. 2. During many rituals, including those held on October 31st, Celtic priests and priestesses wore metal masks. These were masks symbolized by gods or goddesses. The priest spoke on behalf of the god when wearing the mask. And here is the picture of the Fright Night. It is kind of spooky, so... And after I read the recipe, I'll share the recipe next, which is a good recipe. It's called brownies with bone chips. White chocolate bone chips make these Fright Night bites especially irresistible. To make them absolutely good enough to die for, try these cooking trick. Cut the brownies into small squares and freeze them. Defrost them and serve. They will be even moister than more chocolatier. Your ingredients for 16 brownies: 1/4 pound of butter, which is 1 stick, 1 cup sugar, 1/2 cup all-purpose flour, 2 ounces squares of unsweetened chocolate, 2 eggs at room temperature, 1 teaspoon vanilla extract, 1/3 cup of bone chips, white chocolate chips. You're first going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Butter a 9-inch square baking pan. Place your sugar and your flour in a medium-sized bowl and set it aside. Number 3, you're going to melt your unsweetened chocolate and butter in a double broiler over low heat on the stove or in a microwave oven. You're going to stir the mixture until thoroughly mixed. Number 4, add melted mixture to the sugar and flour and beat well. Number 5, add eggs and vanilla and beat again. Number 6, stir in bone chips. Number 7, pour into buttered pan. Bake for 25 to 30 minutes. Do not overbake. These moist brownies might appear too soft in the center, but they will become firmer as they cool. Number 8, cool and cut the brownies into squares. Now we're going to share these 2 pages with you. It's ironic, let me get the microphone back, the man in the moon is shown in this thing because y'all know on Halloween it's a full moon. Just saying. Okay. Okay. Ooh, here's another good scary story. It's called The House on the Corner. The house on the corner had been for sale for over a year. Many people had come to look at it, and several families even wanted to buy it. However, a moment for a serious buyer appeared. One of the neighbors felt it was only fair to warn them about the house. We think the former owner were witches. You wouldn't believe the parties they had underneath that old oak tree in the front yard, all dressed in black, chatting nonsense and dancing around till all hours. One neighbor would whisper, "And we think the spirits still live there," another would add. "We've seen lights going off and on particular times, and I've heard strange clanking and moaning noises in the basement and the attic. Now we call it the haunted house." Andy lived 2 blocks away, and every day he walked his dog, Jake, past the haunted house. The dog loved to romp and play on the front yard, sniff about the knobby trunk of the oak tree. One evening, Jake went to the tree, and for his usual sniff, all of a sudden he let out a howl such as Andy had never heard before, and began to dig furiously at the ground beneath the oak. "Jake, stop. Come here." Andy yanked on the leash, but Jake kept on digging and kicking up dirt. Suddenly he stopped, worked his head into the hole, and he made it, and came out with something in his mouth. He took off, then jerking the leash from Andy's hand. Andy chased Jake, but trailed him by several yards. He was completely out of breath by the time he reached home, where Jake lay panting on the porch, guarding something with his front paws. "Let me see what you got, Jake," Andy ordered. Jake growled and leaped up, took the mysterious object in his mouth, and headed for the backyard. "All right, be that way," Andy yelled, and went inside, leaving the door ajar in hopes that the dog would eventually come in. A while later, after Jake calmed down, he came into the house and laid his treasure at Andy's feet. It looked like an ordinary bone, but it was unusually smooth and white. Andy reached for the bone, but Jake growled and bared his teeth. "Jake, what's gotten into you?" Fed up with the dog, Andy went into the den and watched television. A while later, Andy went into the kitchen, made some popcorn. He switched on the light and found Jake with the bone lying in the by his water dish. Andy stayed away from the bone, and Jake stayed by his dish. As the kernels popped and the corn aroma filled the kitchen, Andy heard the first pops of rain pelt the kitchen windows. Jake looked up at Andy with worried eyes. "Don't worry, Jake," Andy said with a laugh. "It's only a little rain." Suddenly a flash of lightning exploded in the kitchen and made Andy jump. He dropped the pot and he'd been shaken, and it clanked to the floor. Another booming thunder shook the house. Jake bolted from the kitchen, and the lights in the house flickered and went out. "Jake!" Andy screamed, paralyzed with terror and unable to see a thing. He held out his hands to feel his way out of the kitchen. His body ached with fear. He tripped over the fallen pot, and it sent knocking against the table leg. With another bolt of terror through his limbs, he stumbled into the hallway and practically fell over. Jake! His fear melted instantly when he knelt down and hugged his big Labrador. "Good boy, Jake." After a moment, Andy fumbled in the hall closet where his parents kept a flashlight. Feeling more secure behind a beam of light, he and Jake scrambled into the den and huddled together on the couch. They watched the rain from the den window. Excuse me. As thunder boomed and lightning flashed around them, Andy shined the flashlight overflowing the bird bath and gushing rain gutters. Then he opened the window slightly, and the smell of the moist, earthy air rushed in. Suddenly, Jake perked up his ears. "What is it, Jake?" Andy whispered. He heard the noise a second later, a low, distant wail. Soft, constant, like a deep hum. It could have been the wind moaning against the eaves, but there was no wind. Quickly, Andy shut the window. With the hair on his back standing up, Jake dug between the cushions of the couch and snatched the bone. He held it between his paws, then he answered the distant, eerie moan with his own low, rumbling growl. "It's only a coyote or some dog howling. Relax, Jakey." Andy reached out to pet him, but Jake moved away and stood as if ready to attack. Andy realized the dog was sensing danger or something. "Come on, Jake, let's call Mom and Dad," he said with a trembling voice. Andy found the number near the phone where his parents always left it, but when he picked up the receiver, the phone was dead. "Great, the power's out and so is the phone." His voice wavered. He fiddled hopelessly with the buttons. Then he did hear something, but it wasn't a dial tone. It was the low murmuring moan. Now more than a hum, getting stronger and closer. Andy strained to listen, wondering if he could make out the distinct words. Jake suddenly barked furiously with the bone secured underneath the front paw. "No one's going to take your silly bone, Jake," Andy said. "Stop barking." Suddenly Andy could hear the words in a low moaning. "Give me my bone. Give me my bone." A slap of thunder punctuated the low cry. Jake bristled and clenched the bone in his jaw. Andy and the dog dashed upstairs to Andy's bedroom. They slammed the door and scrambled into the bed, and with the covers drawn up to their necks, the deep moan grew even louder and closer. It groaned, "Give me my bone." Jake whinnied, and Andy pulled the blankets in tight. Jake raised his head expectantly as Andy heard a creaking sound, along with the moaning coming closer and louder. "Give me my bone." Andy pulled Jake to him and drew the covers over his head. The moaning were closer and very clear. It continued, "Give me my bone." Andy and Jake cowered under the bedclothes, too terrorized to peek out. Andy tried not to shake. Jake's fur stood up on his back. The moaning seemed just to be outside the door. Then they heard something drag itself along the bedroom floor, scraping closer and closer to Andy's bed. The voice groaned again, "Give me my bone." Something jolted at the bed, and Andy's heart raced and Jake's whole body shook. The booming voice was directly overheard, and it echoed against the walls of the room. "Give me my bone." Andy snatched the bone away from Jake. He sat straight up in bed and flung the object toward the window. He shouted into the frightening air, "Take it," as the bone crashed through the glass. Jake and Andy heard a loud sucking noise as they were both pulled from the bed, covers and all, dumped into the middle of the bedroom floor. The boy and his dog crouched together for a moment more. The sound grew more and more distant until all they heard was the pounding rain. Feeling weak, Andy rose and went to the window. Down in the yard he could see the broken glass. Whatever had moved through the yard had toppled the bird bath, trampled the shrubs, and uprooted the trees. The bone was nowhere to be found in sight. Both Andy and Jake hoped they would never see it again. And that is The House on the Corner. I'll show you the little picture here of Jake and Andy and the bone. Oh, this is so cute. In this section, they tell us how to make mystery mask. Create a mystery mask by wearing a mask. For a change of pace, these masks are handheld. You don't have to worry about wearing a mask, uncomfortable mask that might also block your vision. Don't limit yourself to decorating with paint and glitter. Try this with dried leaves, moss, and twigs. This mask pattern is simple, and let your imagination soar and transform the simple into the simply wondrous. You can make a mask to cover just your eyes or one that covers your entire face. And it's really neat. They have a skull mask, a moss mask, a silver mask, a gold mask, a leaf mask, or a black glitter mask. Look at that. Isn't that awesome for the kids? Just awesome. Okay, we're going to do one more chapter tonight, and then we'll do some 2 chapters tomorrow night. That's my big goal for y'all. Well, the second chapter is called Ghost, Ghost, Ghosts. It is said that on Halloween night in graveyards everywhere, a bizarre ritual takes place. And exactly midnight, death raps on the tombstones and awakens the dead souls. Ghosts, specters, phantoms, shades, spooks, and apparitions all gracefully materialize above the graves. The music starts, tunes that can't be heard by the living, and the transparent figures dance in circles, faster and faster, until they are a blurred cloud of haunted motion. Then suddenly the dancing stops at the first rays of morning light, and they reach the horizon. The ghostly dancers fade into the quiet, cold tombs and silent graves. Their spirits will return next Halloween at midnight, when death rouses them once again for another dance of the dead. Halloween is a special night for the spirits of the dead. The ancient Celts, from whom we have got Halloween, probably started this ancient spooky tradition. The Celts believed that the good and evil spirits were everywhere on the night of October 31st. The eve of their big feast of the Samhain, the Celts lived more than 2,000 years ago, but we still think of nothing but our ghosts, ghosts, ghosts on Halloween night. If you want to see a ghost, you need to know what you are looking for, and you must have proper equipment. Professional ghost hunters are called psychic researchers. They investigate places that they are thought to be haunted. Psychic researchers try to record the presence of a ghost using their special infrared cameras, and that can take pictures in the dark, and other electronic equipment that measures the psychic energy of ghosts. Even if you are not a psychic researcher, you can still look for ghosts. Ghosts usually haunt a place of death, such as a battlefield, the site of a plane crash, or the location of murder or accidental death. Graveyards are said to be haunted by the only one ghost, the spirit of the first person to be buried there, except on Halloween, when others are invited to dance there. This type of ghost is called the graveyard guardian, and it protects the burial ground from evil spirits and intruders. Phantoms or ghosts are not that difficult to recognize because they usually seem to be made of a pale white mist. Unlike the living, they can appear and disappear whenever they want to, and pass through walls and doors. We usually think of ghosts wearing white hooded caps, and some do. These graveyard ghosts, and they appear wearing their long flowing burial robes called shrouds. Other ghosts wear clothes in which they died or were buried. If you were looking for ghosts, there's no telling what type you might see. You might come across a haunting ghost, one that is always seen at the same place, the type of ghost that pays little attention to living people. It is only attracted to the place where it died. You might see the ghost of a living person who is in great danger or near death. These ghosts appear only once. Some ghosts materialize to deliver a message or warning to the living. Like most ghosts, these do not speak, but make signs to explain the message. There are many old stories about ghosts who have special jobs. In Shakespeare's Hamlet, the ghost of Hamlet's father appears to expose his own murderer. Some ghosts appear to reveal their hiding place of money or a treasure, or to make certain that a property or money is returned to its rightful owner. If a person was particularly bad while alive, that person ghost might return to earth to make amends. Poltergeists are noisy, silly ghosts. A poltergeist might cause an object to fly through the air to make loud noises. But these spirits mean no real harm. Poltergeist activity happens most around people ages 12 to 16. Some say that a poltergeist is not a real ghost. It's a special energy called psychokinesis. The energy comes from the mind of young people, and it is responsible for the poltergeist activity. Listen for ghosts. Some legends say that they make a feeble squeaking sound, that like mice or chirping birds. You might find a gallows ghost at a crossroads. Long ago, a crossroads was considered a good place to hang a criminal because the victim's ghost would be confused by all the roads and would be unable to take revenge on its executioner. No matter where they are, ghosts are tricky and eerie. Watch your step, or you might get caught in a swirling ghostly mist. And it says, is your house haunted? Check for these warning signs. Do you hear strange, unexplainable bumping and thumping noises coming from the attic? Are there bloodstains that reappear after you clean them up? Do many footprints leading to the attic mysteriously appear? Are you often awakened by the violent rattling of crystal chandeliers? If you say yes to any of the above, get out of your house fast. Spooky Ghouls Bonfire Ball. Come dance to the music of 4 owls and their hoots, song by the 3 croaking frogs in green suits. Everyone's invited, those who have the gall. to the Spooky Ghouls Bonfire Ball. Make no mistake, choose a clever disguise. There will be a contest with a serious prize. The most terrifying costume will win it all at the Spooky Ghouls Bonfire Ball. Grab your capes, put on your mustache, slip into your gowns, glue on your false eyelashes, track deep in the forest to the tree trunk hall for the Spooky Ghouls Bonfire Ball. Witches will contact a smooth, dangerous brew. Vampires will cook up a heavy, very tasty stew. Then you'll disappear forever, leaving no clues at all of the Spooky Ghouls Bonfire Ball. Ghosts, to the tune of Merrily We Roll Along. Eerily they glide along, slide along, glide along, eerily they glide along, ghosts out on a spree. Ghosts are an international phenomenon. According to the Japanese legends, ghosts were deformed as punishment for evil deeds committed when they were living. These ghosts must wander forever with their legs constantly on fire. In Italy, a 400-year-old legend of a glowing ghost who can foretell death. In India, hordes of small red demon ghosts called bowats roam around attacking people with their sharp pointed teeth. And here's the picture of ghosts, ghosts, ghosts. And they have a recipe here called Sweet Ghosties. If all ghosts were sweet as these ghosties, everyone would want to live in a haunted house just like these real ghosts. They are made of marshmallow and popcorn. Spooks have been known to disappear quickly, so cooks beware. Have some extra on hand. For variation, make sweet ghosties with eerie chocolate eyes and others with red beady gumdrop eyes. Your ingredients for 8 ghosts: 7 cups of plain popped popcorn, 2.5 cups of puffed rice cereal, not crispy rice cereal, 4 cups of miniature marshmallows, 6 tablespoons of butter or margarine, 16 chocolate morsels or red gumdrops, waxed paper, 1 tablespoon softened butter for hands. Only 4 steps. Mix the popcorn and cereal in a large bowl with your hands. Melt the butter or margarine over low heat and add marshmallows and stir until melted. Remove from the heat. Dribble the melted mixture over the popcorn and cereal till this wooden spoon is evenly coated. Rub a little butter on your hands. When the popcorn cereal mix is cool to the touch, take a handful and form it into a ghostly shape, as shown. Flatten it at the bottom, place it on wax paper, add chocolate morsels or gumdrop eyes. Really cool. Okay. This chapter's got a little bit more to go. We got another scary story called General Morris. Not long before he died, old General Morris realized that his relatives wanted his fortune. He knew the night he gave a party in honor of his new and very young wife, Sybil. At the table, General Morris raised his glass and announced, "When our firstborn child comes of age, he or she will be the sole heir to the entire Morris fortune." Sybil blushed with joy, but the aunts, uncles, and cousins grew pale with disappointment. They cast sinister looks at Sybil and clearly said, "If you only had not come along, young lady, then the fortune would be ours." General Morris knew that his relatives would do anything to get his money, so he hid it carefully. On his deathbed, he told Sybil where to find the treasure and asked her to guard it until their newborn son, James, came of age. For almost 18 years, Sybil protected the James inheritance. Then, several months before James was to inherit the fortune, General Morris's cousins, Pauline and Wilton, came for a visit, and things got out of hand. Wilton and Pauline were the worst kind of guests. James disliked them thoroughly, and then he yelled at the servants, demanding dinner on the table now. They gobbled their food, and careless Wilton broke a crystal goblet at almost every meal. He never apologized. They insisted on being taken here and there, never even asking Sybil and James what they wanted to do, and they stayed for 3 interminable weeks. One morning near the end of the 3rd week, Wilton suggested that he and James go on a 2-day duck hunt trip. James reluctantly accepted. After several hours in the duck blind, waiting patiently for the birds and not speaking to each other, Wilton suddenly asked a question. "You'll soon be a very rich man. What are you going to do with all your money?" James shifted awkwardly. "Well, I'm not sure, really. I haven't thought about it much. I guess my mother has some ideas," Wilton interrupted rudely. "Your mother knows nothing about money. Sybil can't even imagine. I can't talk, I'm sorry. Sybil can't even manage the Morrises' fortune. What has she done with it all these years? Has she made investments, bought real estate, stocks, bonds?" Wilton swept his arms dramatically with each word. "Tell me, James, what has she done to increase your wealth?" Wilton could sense that he was frightening James with his strong words, so he changed his tone. He made his voice sweet as honey and put his arm around James' shoulder. "I know a lot about financial matters, James, and I would be more than happy to help you manage your money. Just tell me where you want the fortune and put your mind at ease. I'll handle everything." Wilton smiled sincerely at James. Before James could respond, they both heard Morris's chauffeur running through the woods in the moments. Agitated and out of breath, he was in the duck blind. "Sirs, there's a trouble at the Morris mansion. You must return immediately. Miss Pauline did not tell me why, but you must hurry." Wilton and James rushed back to the mansion. They instinctively ran to Sybil's room. Pauline sat at Sybil's bedside. She moved away from the bed as the men entered and started whispering with Wilton in a corner of the room. As James sat with his dying mother, he caught snatches of Wilton and Pauline's whispering, "I called you back because if James doesn't know where the fortune is, I think she will tell him with her last breath. I know I said not to bring him back until she was dead, but this is our only chance since you couldn't get the information out of him." James leaped away from the bed and grabbed Pauline by the shoulders and shook her. "What have you done to her?" he screamed. Suddenly Sybil let out a long breath, and her eyes focused on James. "James, the treasure, it's—" She expelled. Both James and Pauline ran for the bed and crouched near Sybil. Pauline tried to push her face between Sybil and James so she could hear the dying woman's words, but before Sybil spoke again, she gasped. Her body became rigid, and she stared wide-eyed at James for an instant and then went limp. James cried, "No, Mother, please." He shook her gently, trying to wake her. From across the room, Wilton spoke with a knowing grin. "She's gotten no more than she deserves, boy. Leave her be." He cackled with a sneer. Wilton and Pauline laughed. James lunged at them, but Wilton stopped with a powerful blow and that knocked James to the floor. James was disoriented when he woke up, but the unfamiliar faded into the familiar, and he realized he was in a room where his father had died. As he got up, he winced, for his head was pounding with pain. He walked to the window and looked down the fresh grave, his mother's grave. How he wanted to avenge her death. He went and kicked and pounded on the locked door, but it wouldn't budge. He leaned his throbbing head against the door, heard a commotion downstairs, a distant, constant pounding and periodic laughter. James went to another window, saw several cars in the driveway, and then he realized what was going on. Since Pauline and Wilton could not find Moore's fortune, they had invited other greedy relatives for a treasure hunt. James surveyed the room again, and there was no way out. He knew it. He sat there hopelessly on the bed, resting his head in his hands. What was he going to do? For his mother had not been able to tell him where his fortune was hidden. James raised his head, and gaze met that of his father, staring down at the portrait. James, pleased with his father's likeness, for his help. James wondered if he was dreaming or if he heard the rattling of metals and then the ringing sound of metal sword. He looked nervously around the room and then raised his eyes again to the portrait. With a rustling, General Moore stepped from the portrait and stood before his son. He smiled warmly, then motioned for James to follow him. The door opened magically, and they walked downstairs. They followed the pounding and the laughter to the dining room where Pauline, Wilton, and the others were gathered, some feasting on meats, cheeses, and fruits heaped on the table. Others, such as Wilton, held out goblets of wine. They were busy with the hammers and picks. Wilton was trying to dig up the floor and the fireplace. Pauline directed several of the cousins to remove all the paintings, tapestries from the walls. They were now chipping away at the plaster, looking frantically for hollow cubbies in the wall where the treasure might be hidden. James looked over at his father's ghost, and the ghost smiled broadly. Suddenly a bitter wind chipped through the dining room and rattled the chandeliers. Everyone stopped talking, and their tools clattered to the stone floor. They looked at each other fearfully. Then Wilton said, "It was only the wind. A window must have blown open somewhere. Carry on. Remember, there's a bonus for whoever finds the fortune first." Pauline moved uncertainly to the fireplace, and Wilton joined her. They conversed in whispers for several minutes, trying to decide where to tell their hard-working crew to look next. Suddenly a burst of flames unleashed by the fire. Pauline shrieked, and Wilton screamed as they enveloped by flames. All relatives stood by and watching in terror as Pauline and Wilton were consumed. Their mesmerized terror was broken even when the platters of the food suddenly rose from the table and began spinning wildly overhead. Evil aunts were dunked with all ladies full of gravy. Conniving cousins were pelted with buttered potatoes, string beans, and dollops of chocolate pudding. Unsavory uncles were slapped with sliced turkey and battered with meatballs. Everyone screamed and headed for the front door, but before they could get there, the hole in the floor where they had been pounding gaped open, swallowed every single greedy relative, and then closed again with no sign of disrepair. General Morris's ghost turned to James and winked. He picked up a candelabrum from the table and magically lit the taper with his index finger. His gentle eyes twinkled, and he beckoned for James to follow him again. The ghost led James from room to room and showed him where the Morris fortune was hidden. Right under the relative's nose, jewels were embedded in the picture frames, the very frames Pauline had cast aside. Gold and silver had been woven into the tapestries Wilton had carelessly pulled from the walls. The general's ghost showed James secret drawers where money, gems, and the title deeds were hidden. Finally, they returned to the room where the general had died and stood before the fireplace. The ghost reached out to place a reassuring hand on James' shoulder when a distant clock chimed and the ghost vanished into the portrait on the wall. And that's General Morris's story. And there's a picture of the greedy relatives down there. And this part, they tell you how to make flowing capes, I guess, to match the mask that you made. It says, a flowing cape will make you feel truly dressed up. Choose materials such as old sheets, slinky silver fabric, or satiny black and red cloth to get the effect you want. With this pattern, you can make a ghost, Dracula, witch, princess cape. All are quite dashing and fun to wear. Get help from an adult for this project, and you will be using a hot iron and doing some sewing. Three little ghostes sitting on a postus, eating butter toastus, greasing their fitness up to their wistness. Oh, there were beastresses to make such feastresses. And that is where we're going to stop tonight. And we will pick up on how to recognize a witch. Chapter 3, tomorrow. Will I be doing these in costume? I've been asked that question so much. You got to realize I have a new costume, yes, but I want to do that on October 30th. And then October 31st, I've got another new costume. Yes, I ended up getting 2 new costumes. So you'll probably see me in one costume one night and one costume the next night. Am I going to tell you which one? No. I only have a select few costumes left. I don't know if you're going to see me in one of them. You got to remember I gave most of them to my mom to give to consignment so she could get some money for the loan on the house at that time, which is now paid off. Because that's a long story. But anyway, I enjoyed sharing those little Halloween tidbits with you. And we'll share some more Halloween tidbits tomorrow night. Stay safe, keep your social distance, wash your hands. If you can't wash your hands, use your hand sanitizer, and always, always wear your mask.